For our next conversation, we're going to be taking a look at the gaming sector, and it might surprise you, as it did me, to learn that gaming has become the most profitable form of entertainment on the planet, bigger than music and Hollywood combined. To tell us more about this opportunity, I would like to invite Pam Ford and her panel to the stage. Pam is Director, Investment and Industry at Tātaki, Auckland Unlimited, which is, of course, Tamaki Makoto's cultural and economic development agency. Pam has worked in economic development and international trade and investment for over 20 years in central and local government roles, and I know that she has a huge interest in the creative and technology sectors. Thank you, Pam. Over to you.
Kia ora koutou. I know what Chris Siege is talking about. It's quite a glare when you get up here. So welcome back, everybody. Sit back and relax after lunch. You're going to have 30 minutes of pure joy here, hearing from two wonderful international entrepreneurs in the creative industry space. I do note that we're talking about gaming, and for a former Minister of Racing, we're not talking about TAB. And we're not talking about the Commonwealth Games, where we're doing very well at the moment. We're talking about video games. And as Tim alluded to, a few facts. The New Zealand gaming industry is $323 million worth, heading to $1 billion by 2025. And to carry on the example that's all in our heads, that's 10 times the tripe exports to China. And like the food exports to China, 90% of gaming in New Zealand are exports. So they're a very profitable, weightless export for the country. Worldwide, the market is worth $234 billion. And to put that in context, that's more than the movie industry and the professional sport industry combined. China leads the way. They are the market leader with $46.6 billion US dollars in that sector. So I was thrilled when Fran put this topic on the agenda. Obviously, when we think China and trade, we generally think of our goods, food and fibre exports. But services, including tech and creative tech in this instance, is really important in a growing sector. Minister O'Connor talked about Weta this morning, and Weta being a great example of a creative tech company. And just before I introduce our wonderful panellists, a quick story about Weta and Sir Richard Taylor. And I do want a nod to Rachel Maidman, if Rachel's still here. Rachel, who was Consul General in Guangzhou, and in 2017 we had the Tripartite Economic Alliance up in Guangzhou, and Sir Richard was the guest keynote speaker and well loved by people in Guangzhou. And Rachel did a wonderful podcast with Sir Richard, and he told this story, which is just a few seconds long. He said when he was a young boy, he got a book from a closing down sale of a local library. It was a black and white photographic book of a collection of images, and it was work done by some unknown sculptor in some unknown land. He was fascinated and started to copy the sculptures in the book, digging clay out of the creek. And he used the book to self-train and then train others that built his company, Weta. He used the inspiration from that book, a book that was from a Chinese artist. 20 years later, on a trip in Chengdu, China, his car was passing through a local sculpture precinct, and he asked the driver to pull over so that he could have a look. He went into a studio and got into a conversation with an elderly sculptor through an interpreter. The sculptor showed Richard his portfolio, and then Richard realised that the sculptures in the book, which inspired him when he was a young boy, were done by this very elderly sculptor, Professor Zhao. And it was one of the most impactful moments in Sir Richard's life. So the connection between the creative industries, in this case sculpting and books, really can lead to some wonderful cultural exchange. So with that, our cultural exchange ambassadors here, we have two very successful young people. Christine Lee. Christine is the CEO, co-founder, partner of Eudora Investment Limited and Windforce Games China. She's a graduate of the University of Auckland and Tsinghua University. She worked as Vice President of Forlong Group China, working on key projects towards the 2022 Olympic Games, the Winter Olympic Games in Beijing on intercultural projects. And in 2018, she co-founded Windforce Games China, a brand that has a series of high-quality mobile games. Most recently, the company created the distribution of the brand Wind Power Games, and she has launched in the New Zealand market a company called Eudora Plus that we'll hear about shortly. And next to Christine is Allan, and interesting fact, both these young people came to live in New Zealand at the age of 8. Not together, but coincidentally 8, which is of course a lucky number, so to the lucky country. Allan is an artist and creative entrepreneur whose work spans illustration, comics, game development, VR, and many disciplines. His company, Chrome, is a boutique Auckland creative agency, and they produce ChromaCon, a biennial New Zealand indie arts festival that connects Kiwis, creatives, and the China community. The 2019 festival featured 200 exhibitors from New Zealand, as well as 11,500 visitors. Allan has extensive experience bridging cultural and creative collaboration between China and New Zealand via the Sino New Zealand film production, video game publishing, and artistic exchange. Welcome both Christine and Allan. So we'll start with you, Christine. Do you want to just tell us a little bit more about particularly Eudora Plus and Windforce Games?
Okay. Thank you, Pam. And thank you for inviting me to this event. Especially thank you for Ms. Lisa Lee for passing my profile through to the event organizer. I didn't know my work was so important to be good enough to be on this event at all. Yes, to start with, Eudora Investmnet was founded actually 8 years ago in China, and we specialize in software development in a lot of scenarios in China. We have stepped into game sector since 2018 and with the brand of Windforce. And our games have been published in China as well as the USA. And we have get a lot of feedback from the USA players. It was quite good with the Americans. And in the beginning of this year, we have founded a new brand called Eudora Plus. It specializes in mobile devices charging network among users around the world. It is well used all over the world, even in our neighborhood, Australia. And this brand aims to bring technology and digital exports to advancement in New Zealand and New Zealand-China exchange. Yeah.
Fantastic. You're very humble, Christine. You are doing incredibly well. You're a very smart entrepreneur, as I found out last night. Allan, how about your company, Chrome? Tell us a little bit about that and what you've got on the go.
Thank you. Yeah, kia ora, everyone. Thank you, Pam. I am also feeling very honored to be invited on part of this panel. Like was introduced, I run an organization called Chroma, which we've hosted an event called ChromaCon since 2013. And as part of that, and as part of a much larger initiative, it's really about facilitating and fostering the development and creation of original IP in New Zealand. And obviously, video games is quite as described by Tim earlier, one of the leading entertainment and arts medium of the present day. And I think certainly for a lot of young people, as digital natives who's grown up in this age of the information age, in terms of going from drawing to illustration to comics to games, it's all very much a sort of natural native process for them in terms of engaging with culture, engaging with stories, and what we do really is to support New Zealand to be creators in New Zealand to be more than just service providers, but more creators of our own original ideas and intellectual property. So that starts with obviously connecting with the wider community in New Zealand, just to let them know that there's more than Lord of the Rings. Actually, a lot of our creators punch well above their weight on the international stage, and actually a lot of their fan bases, it's just a shame that even locally, a lot of them don't realize it's made in New Zealand. And an extension of that obviously is to take what we create here in New Zealand overseas to international audiences, to international markets and industries, to foster collaborations, co-productions, and just exploring more opportunities. In China, obviously being the largest video game market, it's one of the most important partners that we sort of explore on an ongoing basis.
Interesting. So tell us a bit about how it works. I mean, you've both got companies here based in New Zealand. Do you have employees or developers in China, or do you use developers here? And I guess a lead on from that question, what are the benefits of being based here and having the cultural exchange with China?
For us, we have a group of developers in Shenzhen, in China, and we have two of the artists back here in New Zealand. I think the most important advantage that we have here is we have a less and smaller population. We're not overwhelmed with all kinds of disturbs and factors that affect the creativeness. And what's so different here is, well, since New Zealand has much more respect to IP protections, that was not very well respected back in the years in China, where people were not so aware of patent protections. That was something that we really look into in New Zealand as well. And I want to bring up a example in China with the gaming industry. It's with the Harry Potter and one of the biggest gaming company called NetEase in China. They have held hands together 2 years ago to found this new game called Harry Potter in China. And they actually attracted 7 million more players into this game when they were not players of any games before. That was a good example of a strong IP that could work with a good developer and with such good market in China with a big population. So here today, I'm thrilled to be here. It's lucky to see Zespri people here as well. So maybe one day we could put Zespri, put kiwi fruit into one of our games to promote New Zealand as well.
Where's Dan? Oh, Dan's got a thumbs up there. Here we go. It's the beauty of these conferences, you see, the connections. Allan, how about you? What are the benefits of being based here in New Zealand?
Well, I mean, I mentioned, that we run an art festival. It's probably the largest of its kind in New Zealand, because we primarily just focus on independent IP. And obviously, in the past, we've invited a lot of top creators from around the world, in particular from China, to collaborate and exchange ideas with us in New Zealand, and we've done the same. Through exchange trips and business trips, and build a lot of connections with other trade shows and expos and industry organizations in China. And one of the things we noticed, obviously, during the pandemic, unfortunately, we couldn't travel, but because of a lot of what we create is digital anyway, and the creative industries have been digitally exporting for quite a long time. In fact, it's been sort of like a golden age of independent production, obviously, over the past 10, 15 years or so, ever since I sort of started working in the industry, through digital platforms of distribution and crowdfunding. A lot of opportunities sort of arise for both young people, new startups, as well as established organizations such as Weta. So during the pandemic, for example, we actually just right at the beginning of the pandemic, I work with industry organizations in China. We've done like game jams to raise charitable funding for hospitals, to raise awareness of COVID right in the beginning of the pandemic. And each year since previous years, we've been able to do digital showcases of New Zealand games, whether it's live in person in China when they were able to host events, or just purely digitally through streaming and influencers. So we're still able to market and connect with Chinese audiences, even though developers in New Zealand can't actually physically travel. So yeah, I think we've been able to see these meaningful connections built over the years really come to fruition, even though because of travel restrictions, the gaming sector across both China and New Zealand have grown actually throughout the pandemic.
The beauty of digital trade, yeah?
Yeah.
Christine, do you want to just tell us, the gaming genre can be applied to health and education and all sorts of things. You mentioned that you were involved in the Winter Olympics in Beijing. What did you do there in terms of gaming?
Well, we didn't do anything about softwares in the Winter Olympics, but that was much more of the Alibaba work. But within the educational and the healthcare section, we actually developed a few mini programs for research departments to do some diabetes questionnaires for people to control their diet through entertainment of games, so they became more aware of their health conditions and all that. So what I want to say is isn't just about entertainment. It's actually the logic behind it is to improve people's lives with more of a better experience, instead of just we're posting posters on the walls of lifts and then tell people to look after their health. So this is quite important. And yeah, with the educational sector as well, with the fast, rapid change with technology, this is really important for young people to know what the right way of using technology with games instead of addiction to the games.
What's happening in the gaming sector in China right now, Allan? I've noticed that gaming application approvals have dropped significantly. What's happening in the sector in China? Are there less games, or is there more regulation?
I think what we've just seen is that there's a bit of a regulatory reform around how games are licensed and distributed in China. And partly it's because there wasn't really any sort of regulations at all. And as part of that, also because games, there's so many different ways of accessing games. There's different business models as well. And obviously, there's a lot of audience that are very young, a lot of underage, obviously. So because of just because of the sheer scale of the Chinese market, like whenever you put a sort of pause on something, even if you try to open the faucet again, the backlog is just so immense. And not to mention there's international games looking to be published in China as well as domestic games. So that sort of just is kind of like, it's almost like international logistics. It's just sort of, you've got this like issue that is just causing sort of a stopgap. But actually, what's interesting is, the latest figures I got from colleagues in China are that actually like domestic sales have gone down a little bit, just 1.8% or something. But like international exports of like Chinese games have gone up. So it's quite a fascinating time, and I've been hearing that a lot of Chinese studios are actually recently quite interested in exporting their own original IPs like internationally. Actually a couple of years ago there was big interest in like publishing New Zealand games in China. So we keep seeing these new opportunities sort of arise.
Right, I can see. We've got a few questions coming through, so we might take one of those. This is one for you, I think, Christine. What do you think of the idea of including New Zealand-themed environments, skins and equipment in existing games in China? For example, eating Zespri to refuel in, I don't know this, PUBG?
I'll help you with that. PUBG is a very popular game in China. Actually, not only China, I think is around the world. I think...
Too old.
Yeah. To answer that question, it's interesting someone brought up PUBG because I think this is a very important example. It has arisen very popular since the COVID pandemic. And what's different with PUBG is you get maybe 100 or more, I don't play with them, but 100 or more players in one round in the battlefield. And I have looked into why this became so popular in the pandemic. It's psychology. People want to be engaged because they were in a big lockdown. They couldn't see people around. So this is a very good scenario for people to actually virtually be engaged. And to answer that question, I would love to put that in the NZ theme into that game if I own that game. Or later on, maybe I could develop something like that. Yeah.
Or maybe influence the owner of the game. That's a really great idea. Allan, I don't know if you know the answer to this. What genre of games are the most popular in China? and what demographic is playing games?
I think it's like strategy, role playing, and action, like those three. But yeah, it's. I mean, the demographics is really, really broad. Because I mean, even before I came to New Zealand, the sort of like Mario, Nintendo, a lot of childhood, from my age, so grew up with that, and I guess I would be what was previously coined a nerd, but yeah, I mean that's not like uncommon, but obviously then from my generation they have like children now, and obviously they grew up playing games, so it's a very broad demographic, and I guess in a way that's kind of the issue around licensing regulations, because it's like much like films, there's you gotta have like age restrictions and just that sort of thing, and that takes time to like develop.
We've heard a lot this morning about the primary industries, and we have a lot of competitive advantage when you look at our country and our history in terms of producing great products. What competitive advantage does New Zealand have when it comes to game development, if any? Any ideas there?
Well, for me, I think the competitive advantage, once again, I just said here earlier, is less disturbed, first of all. Well, if you look into our industry in China, we get very much annoyed and affected by investors and how they want the games to be in China, because we're just investment relied on. So in here, the artists can actually focus on the creativity and the themes they actually wants to create. And to be more competitive in the future, I think it's more important the developers in here, if they are targeting Chinese market, they have to get into the habit of their target market. For example, I see the question, what genre of games are most popular? All kinds of games are popular, but depends on where you put them. Normally, we started from computer games, and from the PC computers, the old school style, and hardly anyone uses PC for games right now, only for competitions and popular competitions. And then we evolved to mobile phones, and later on we had apps and mini programs on WeChat. So that would attract a lot of more non-players into games. This is really important. That's why we're here in New Zealand, because we brought the charging network here. So people get used to the charging of mobile phones and how they use it in China, as well as our partner Alibaba New Zealand. They are doing actually the same thing. So they actually lead people to know what's in there in the Chinese market. So people will know what kind of product, what kind of services, what kind of games that's more suitable for you to tap into the Chinese market.
Yeah, so you have to understand how the Chinese user of your game actually thinks and what equipment they use, which could be very different to here.
Yes, if all the Chinese users are using and so used to use mini programs for gaming, then there's no point you invent a game that's only played on PC.
Yeah, gotcha. Oh, Allan, here's a question for you.
Can I just add to that very quickly?
Sure.
Because I think yes, mobile is the largest gaming platform in China. At the same time, there's many different business models. And an analogy that's more familiar for folks here might be cinema films versus like art house films that are festival based, or TV shows. Then now you have like streaming platforms. So each one, there's a different maybe like scale of audience, but also different business model in terms of how the creator might benefit from their creations. So actually PC right now is thriving in China because of the international version of Steam is still accessible in China, and that does not require licensing for your game to be published. So I mean, ever since I would say 2015, we've seen a lot of New Zealand game developers who really solely release their games as a premium product that is charged like the standard pricing, so anywhere from $60 to maybe $15 as an independent game, like different scale, but it's like a guaranteed sort of audience and earning. And that's been I would say a lot of the majority they've recognized that China actually is their largest market, because you can see that just from the IP of how many people are playing in China, that has not gone down, has actually gone up because you can still purchase their games in China. So I would say, yeah, it's a different like scale in terms of what your business model is. But I think one thing to remember is even if it's like a super niche platform in China, like if you're able to capture like 1% of the Chinese gaming market, that's still like a massive success, economically.
Yeah, lots of variety. So there is a question about how does the gaming industry make money in China? But you're saying there's many different models, and you just have to find out. Yeah. Allan, this sounds like you might have a pet project going on. Can you tell us about the gold miner game that you are developing and elements that could be put together amongst the dragon and the taniwha, the jade and the pounamu?
Oh, that's a beautiful one. Yeah, that's a beautiful metaphor. Actually, I was going to answer this in regards to the previous question about just I guess different aspects of gaming. And I think an example I was going to give to that is entertainment is not like the only even like genre, we could say. And the example given was a couple years ago for the 175th anniversary of Chinese migration in New Zealand. It was a gold mining exhibition at the Auckland Museum. So I was fortunate enough to be commissioned to develop like a museum game, which is called Golden Threads, and explores the Chinese gold mining history in New Zealand. And ever since then, I've been personally really passionate about. I mean, it's a subject I was really passionate about already, but being able to explore that as I mean, there's different names from the genre, but some people call it serious games, or they say like edutainments almost. But yeah, there's a lot of ways games can be accessed by audiences, and that's a personal project of mine. And I've exhibited in China before, and it was really fascinating to connect with audiences, like gamers and non-gamers alike, on such a project, because for them it's breaking down those barriers, because it's no longer just about do I have the skill to play this game on a competitive level, but it's more about like, oh, this is part of history that I wasn't aware of. And yeah, there's many examples of this. Like I was mentioning the game jam to raise funds for COVID, and we created myself and a lot of Chinese game developers. We made a lot of like storytelling, about raising awareness of the pandemic, how to protect yourself. So there's a lot of use cases for games.
Fantastic. We're heading towards the end. We've heard a lot about opportunity, but Christine, what do you see as the barriers to increasing our creative exports to China?
I don't know if many of you know, since 2018, the game publicity license was issued 4,600 something each year, but then to last year they have narrowed down to 23 licenses that you can actually public games in China, with the restrictions of age and names and identity. So we don't get very young people too addicted to the games. So for you to be chosen into one of those 23s, you have to have a very strong theme, IP, and the logic behind it. And what I would recommend is talking about the future. Well, for New Zealand and China, we don't share the same skin color or language, but we share the same pandemic with COVID. So any games that looks into education, healthcare, and also a strong theme would success. That's what I thought.
That's a very good answer. Allan, what about you? What do you see as the barriers to growing our creative exports to China in gaming?
I think the barrier, like obviously the licensing is an issue, but for me, I think that's more of a short-term thing, because these regulation processes take time. But thankfully, I think one of the greatest ways we can overcome this is the games industry, because it's so new, it has been quite a globalized sector in both China and New Zealand. So the games industry here in New Zealand, like we've made games for global audiences for a long, long time. And likewise, the most popular games in China are those shared commonly with the top games around the world. And so now you're seeing, because of maybe regulatory restrictions, bigger focus recently in China on creating games for the global market. And that's something that New Zealand game developers have actually always done. So you're seeing these opportunities arrive where actually, unfortunately, we can't travel, but if we're able to still like have more cultural exchange and just sort of support for New Zealand, obviously, for us to continue developing original IP here, then I think we're able to definitely have more opportunities to collaborate and just build games together for global audiences.
Great, thanks. Well, I think the message is that gaming is a huge sector in China, and for any of our exporters, be they Zespri or other products, it's another way of trying to get your message through the edutainment, the health, gaming, and all of those. So thank you, Christine, and thank you, Allan. Both fascinating to hear from both of you, and we wish you all the very best for the future with your companies. Thank you.
Thanks, man.